Alright guys, Rich here from the RC Network, and this is going to be my full review of the BSR Racing BZ-888. Now this is their 1/8 scale four-wheel drive buggy. They have two options available on hobbyking.com for both the RTR, which is the one I picked up, and also an ARTR, or almost ready to run. Now the almost ready to run, you do not get a radio or receiver, so you do have to supply those on your own. Now with mine, I did get this great 2.4 gigahertz radio. It is pretty bare bones and it does feel a little bit cheap in the hand, but the only major downfall I saw as far as connectivity was connecting it with 8 AA batteries, which I had to actually borrow some out of another remote to be able to film this car. So only downer about the remote, if you already have a upgraded remote or a remote that's aftermarket, you can pretty much pick up a receiver and bind it to this vehicle. So anyways, that is my thoughts on this radio. As far as the BSR Racing buggy, this thing is pretty cool, and I think right around $199 gets you the RTR version, and I've got to say, for what you get in the box, it is just amazing. It drove perfect out of the box. Just did some minor tweaks to the ride height. I found that the suspension was set really low. I'm not sure that if it was out for shipping purposes, but it was sitting almost completely on the ground when I was running this thing. So dialed in a little bit of shock height, and this thing really performed once I did that. Now, one thing I do have to note is I did have a couple of issues with the hardware. I ended up shearing off one of the shock bolts up here, easily replaced, and no issues after that. Now, I did have an issue with the 17 millimeter wheel hexes coming off, and I'd like to go ahead and donate 2 nickels over to the factory where this was installed. Tighten them down, please. I should have checked before I ran this, but that day, of course, I did not have my 17 millimeter wrench with me, so I had to kind of makeshift one out of some needle nose pliers, which was not fun. But nonetheless, it didn't do any damage to the wheels, and I was off and running once I tightened them, all 4 of them, back down. Now, as far as this buggy, as far as the way it runs, it ran great. I had no issues with the way it ran. Plenty of power on 4S. It had the proper gearing, the proper suspension. I was launching it over 15 wide gap jumps, and it really performed. The body, I've got to say, is a little bit awkward because it doesn't cover all the way down on the chassis. You can kind of see here there's bits and pieces of the chassis kind of exposed. I wish that would have went all the way down. Would have been a nice touch. Overall, the body did great. Just some minor scratches up here from flipping it over, but buggy bodies typically do a lot better than short course or maybe monster truck. Now with the BZ-888, it does not come with typical type of connectors. I did have to go ahead and solder on some Dean's connectors. I actually forgot about that and did that the morning of the shoot, so had to kind of get that going pretty quick. Now the motor and ESC performed flawlessly. I had no issues with that. Plenty of power out of the gate. The gearing seemed to be pretty proper, and the only thing that I noticed in here was that the spur gear and pinion gear is dangerously close to this battery box, so please be aware of that. I mean, it is so close. I mean, there's like not even a half of a millimeter in between there, so if there's any kind of movement or a bearing blows, it's going to start weeding away into that battery box. As far as the servo, there's no markings on the servo, and it was pretty well spec'd. It was slow, to be honest, and that would probably be one of the first things I would upgrade on this buggy. I'm a servo nut, so I love putting in high-powered and very quick servos. The servo horn seemed to make its way through my bashing on it. I did not break the servo horn, which was the first thing I thought would go. Nonetheless, everything else was fine with the electronics. 2.4 gigahertz receivers way up here seemed to do fine. Overall, the suspension was pretty well dampened. I don't have any issues with the suspension other than the ride height, which I adjusted earlier. I had no breakages besides the one bolt. It just sheared straight off, lost the nut, lost the washer, and ended up replacing it just with another, I think it's like a 20mm screw that goes into there. So in the end, I think this is a great buggy. I've seen other mods where people have taken one of the battery boxes off, put a full 4S on here, and moved the ESC to the other side behind the motor. I think I might try that. We'll have to see how well this thing performs down the line. Having pretty much dog bones in the rear was a little bit of a bummer, but I get it on this price point. I don't see that they could have improved that anymore for the $200 that this thing came in at. But overall, guys, I think this is a good buy. One big downfall that I've seen in the comments, and I haven't had to experience it yet, is part support. And of course, the only place you can pick up parts for this is going to be hobbyking.com. And I've heard issues that they have problems keeping the parts in stock. I haven't had an issue yet, so I'll have to report back on that later. But nonetheless, BSR Racing BZ-888, I think it's a decent buggy. For $200, you can't go wrong. Well, guys, that's it for now. If you enjoyed this video, please throw up a like and any comments or questions on down below. Over and out.